The baton hit the window before Daniel even finished the thought. Inside that black SUV, a German shepherd lay collapsed against the door, tongue swollen, chest barely moving. And beside him, a woman slumped over the steering wheel, skin flushed the color of a brick. Not sleeping, not resting, dying. The dashboard read 110 degrees. Daniel had about 40 seconds to decide: break the law or watch two living things cooked to death in a parking lot. He swung the baton again. The glass exploded inward, and everything that followed would change his life forever. If you're watching this right now, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and stay with me until the very end, because what happens next is something I still can't believe is real. Phoenix didn't warn you before it tried to kill you. It just did it quietly, through the shimmer rising off asphalt, through the way the air sat thick and heavy in your lungs, through the silence of a parking lot at 2 in the afternoon, when every sane person had already retreated indoors. Officer Daniel Reyes had been on patrol for 3 hours and 14 minutes when the call came through. Unit 7, we've got a report of a dog trapped in a vehicle at the Sunridge Supermart on West Camelback. Engine appears to be off. Caller says the animal is in distress. Owner is not responding. Daniel clicked his radio. Copy. En route. In the passenger seat, his own canine partner Rex lifted his head from where he'd been dozing, ears forward, alert, the instant he sensed Daniel's posture change. Easy, buddy, Daniel said. We're on it. He pulled out of the gas station lot and made a right onto Camelback Road. The temperature reading on his dash said 109 degrees. It had said 109 for the past 4 hours. By now, it probably felt like a lie. If anything, it was hotter than that. He saw the SUV the moment he swung into the parking lot. Black exterior, tinted windows, parked at an angle near the far end of the lot, away from the other cars, like whoever parked it had been in a hurry or just hadn't cared. No engine running, no movement inside that he could see. Daniel pulled up alongside it and got out. Rex whined softly behind the partition. Stay, Daniel said. He approached the driver's side window and cupped his hand against the glass to cut the glare. What he saw stopped him cold. The German shepherd was pressed against the rear door, panting in slow, labored pulls. The dog's tongue was swollen, visibly swollen, hanging out the side of his mouth like something too big for his body to contain. His eyes were half closed. His legs weren't moving. But then Daniel shifted his gaze, and his stomach dropped. A woman, in the driver's seat, slumped forward over the steering wheel, her forehead resting against it, arms hanging loose at her sides. Her skin was flushed a deep, angry red. Her lips were parted, but not moving. Daniel knocked hard on the window. Hey, ma'am, can you hear me? Nothing. He knocked again, harder, using the heel of his fist. Police! Ma'am, open the door! The dog stirred at the sound, but couldn't raise his head. The woman didn't move at all. Daniel grabbed his radio. Dispatch, Unit 7. I need EMS immediately at Sunridge Supermart, West Camelback. I have an unresponsive adult female and a canine in distress inside a locked vehicle. Engine is off. Requesting immediate medical response. Copy, Unit 7. EMS is being dispatched. ETA, approximately 6 minutes. 6 minutes. Daniel looked back at the car. He looked at the dashboard through the windshield. There was a small digital temperature display on the console. Even from outside, he could read the number. 110 degrees. He said it out loud to himself, without meaning to. 110. That wasn't a temperature a human body survived for long. Not in direct sun. Not with no airflow. Not when every surface in that car had been absorbing heat for how long? The caller hadn't said how long the car had been sitting there. Daniel pulled his baton. He didn't think about property law. He didn't think about liability. He didn't think about the report he'd have to file or the conversation he'd have with his supervisor later. He thought about the fact that the human body begins experiencing organ damage at a core temperature of 104 degrees. And that woman's skin was the color of someone who'd already blown past that number. He swung the baton and the window exploded. The heat that poured out of that car hit Daniel like a physical blow. A wall of scorched, dead air that carried the smell of hot plastic and something else underneath it. Something that made every instinct he had fire at once. He reached in and unlocked the rear door. The German Shepherd fell against him the moment the door opened. Not aggressively, not with any energy at all. Just collapsed sideways into Daniel's arms like a sack of dead weight. The dog's body was burning hot to the touch, even through Daniel's uniform sleeve. "I got you," Daniel said. "I got you, come on." He carried the dog away from the car and lowered him onto the pavement in the strip of shade beneath his patrol cruiser. Rex pressed his nose against the partition glass and barked once, sharp and urgent. "Rex, down," Daniel said. Rex obeyed, but his eyes never left the other dog. Daniel went back to the SUV. He opened the driver's door and caught the woman before she could pitch sideways out of the seat. She was dead weight in his arms, completely limp, no resistance, no reflexes. He lowered her as carefully and as quickly as he could onto the pavement beside his patrol vehicle. Up close, she looked young, mid-20s maybe, strong. He could feel the muscle in her arms even as they hung limp. She was wearing a fitted athletic shirt and tactical pants, and even in that state, even unconscious, there was something in the way she was built that spoke to years of hard physical training. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that her breathing was shallow and rapid, quick, panicked little gasps that weren't moving enough air. What mattered was that her pulse, when Daniel pressed 2 fingers to her neck, was racing so fast it was almost vibrating. "Ma'am," he patted her cheek firmly. "Ma'am, can you hear me? I need you to stay with me." No response. Daniel grabbed the emergency water bottle from his patrol bag and cracked the seal. He poured it over the back of her neck, over her wrists, over the inside of her forearms where the blood vessels ran close to the surface. Then he grabbed the cooling cloth from his kit and pressed it against her forehead. Back at the SUV, the German Shepherd was still lying on his side in the shade, breathing, but barely. Behind the partition, Rex had stopped barking. He was sitting perfectly still now, watching the other dog with an intensity that Daniel had never seen from him, except on the most serious calls. It was like Rex understood. "She's got a pulse," Daniel said into his radio, more to anchor himself than to report anything. "Pulse is rapid and weak. Breathing is present but shallow. I'm performing emergency cooling. Where's my EMS?" "Unit 7, EMS is 4 minutes out. Keep her cool and on her side if possible." "Copy." Daniel gently rolled her onto her side and checked her airway. That's when he saw the tattoo. On her left forearm, just below the inside of her elbow, a small insignia, clean lines, deliberate placement. The kind of tattoo you got to mark something permanent, something earned. Daniel recognized the symbol. Not immediately, not with certainty, but something about it pulled at him. He filed it away and focused on keeping her alive. The paramedics arrived in 3 minutes and 40 seconds, faster than dispatch had estimated, and Daniel had never been more grateful for anything in his life. He stepped back to let them work, but he didn't go far. He watched the first paramedic, a woman named Torres, based on her name tag, drop to her knees beside the unconscious woman and begin her assessment. The second paramedic went straight for the dog. "Core temperature?" Torres asked her partner as she ran her hands along the woman's neck, checking lymph nodes, pulse, responsiveness. "Working on it. She's been in heat exposure for a while." Torres pulled back the woman's eyelids gently. "Pupils reactive but sluggish. She's in stage 3 heat stroke. We need to move." She looked up at Daniel. "You did the right thing with the cooling. It may have bought her time." "Will she make it?" Torres didn't answer right away. She was already pulling the gurney. That pause said everything. Then she stopped. Her hand stilled over the woman's arm, right over the tattoo Daniel had noticed. Torres looked up at her partner, then back down, then at Daniel. "Do you know who this is?" Torres asked. Daniel shook his head. Torres turned the woman's arm slightly so Daniel could see it better. And then she said the words quietly, not dramatically, not for effect, but in the way you say something when you're still processing it yourself. "She's Naval Special Warfare. This is a Navy SEAL." For a moment, nobody spoke. The sound of the gurney wheels on hot asphalt, Rex shifting his weight behind the partition, the distant sound of traffic on Camelback. Daniel looked at the unconscious woman. Young, strong, trained to survive things most people couldn't imagine, being lifted onto a stretcher in a grocery store parking lot. Not from a bullet, not from an enemy, from the heat, from a parked car, from 40 minutes of bad luck and a vehicle that didn't do what it was supposed to do. "What's her name?" Daniel asked. Torres checked the ID she'd retrieved from the woman's tactical vest. "Collins. Petty Officer Ava Collins." Daniel looked down at Ava Collins, this decorated sailor, this warrior, and felt something tighten in his chest that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite anger. It was something in between, something that didn't have a clean name. He looked over at the German Shepherd, now on a secondary stretcher, an oxygen mask fitted carefully over his muzzle. The dog's eyes were open but glassy, tracking the movement around him without full comprehension. He looked back at Ava. She had survived things most people never faced, and she almost died in a parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon. Because nobody stopped. Nobody stopped. Until Daniel did. Later, reviewing his body cam footage in the hospital waiting room, Daniel would notice something in the first 40 seconds of footage that the investigators would spend the next 72 hours trying to explain. Something in that car had failed, and it wasn't an accident. The ambulance doors hadn't even closed before Daniel was back at the SUV. He didn't know why. Instinct, maybe. Or the part of him that had been a cop long enough to know that when something felt wrong, you didn't walk away from it. You walked toward it until you understood what your gut was already telling you. He stood at the driver's door and looked at the interior without touching anything. The broken glass from the window he'd smashed was scattered across the seat and the floor. The heat pouring out of the car had dropped slightly now that it was open to the outside air, but it was still brutal, like standing in front of an open furnace. And there it was, the climate control panel. Active, not off. The display was still lit, temperature set to maximum cool, fan speed at full, recirculation engaged. Every setting exactly where you'd put them if you were trying to bring a hot car down to a livable temperature as fast as possible. Ava Collins hadn't forgotten to turn on the air conditioning. She had turned it on. It just hadn't worked. Daniel stepped back and pulled out his phone and took 3 photographs of the panel before dispatch could tell him not to. Then he radioed in. "Dispatch, Unit 7. I need a supervisor and a vehicle impound hold on the SUV at Sunridge Supermart. This is not an abandoned vehicle situation. I need the car treated as a potential evidence vehicle. Nobody touches it until I say so." There was a pause on the other end. "Copy that, Unit 7. Can you clarify the nature of the hold? Daniel looked at the panel one more time. Mechanical failure investigation, he said. Possible product liability. I'll explain when the supervisor arrives. Sergeant Webb arrived 11 minutes later, and Daniel walked him through it without preamble. Climate system was active, Daniel said, pointing at the panel through the broken window. Set to max cool. Fan on full. The car was still 110 degrees inside. Webb studied the panel. His expression didn't change much. It rarely did. But his eyes sharpened. Software defect? I don't know yet, but I want to find out before someone tells me this was operator error. You think someone's going to try to say that? I think a Navy SEAL nearly died in a parking lot because a piece of equipment didn't do what it was supposed to do, Daniel said flatly. And I think whoever manufactured that equipment has a very strong interest in this being called her fault instead of theirs. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate. I'll get the impound hold. You go to the hospital and stay with the situation there. Already planning on it. Reyes. Webb caught his arm before he turned away. You broke that window without a warrant. I know. There's going to be a process. I know that too. Webb held his gaze. Just making sure you're walking into it clear-eyed. Daniel pulled his arm free, gently. Marcus. She was at 106.8. The dog's heart was barely beating. If the process has a problem with what I did, then I'll sit across from whatever review board they put in front of me, and I'll explain it as many times as they need to hear it. He got in his cruiser. Rex pressed his nose against the back of Daniel's neck from behind the partition, warm and solid. I know, buddy, Daniel said. Let's go. The waiting room at Maricopa Medical Center was the kind of place that stripped time from you. No windows. Fluorescent lights that hummed just below the threshold of conscious awareness. Chairs that seemed specifically designed to make sitting for more than 20 minutes feel like a small punishment. Daniel had been in that chair for 43 minutes when the two Navy officers walked in. He noticed them immediately, not because they were in uniform, but because of the way they moved. Purposeful. Scanning. The way people moved when they were already in mission mode before they crossed the threshold. The taller one, a lieutenant commander based on his insignia, went straight to the nurse's station. The second one, a younger lieutenant, swept the room with his eyes and landed on Daniel. He crossed the room and sat down one seat away from Daniel without being invited. Officer Reyes, the lieutenant said. Daniel looked at him. You have me at a disadvantage. Lieutenant Garza, Naval Special Warfare Command. He didn't offer a hand. We've been monitoring Petty Officer Collins' training status. When her check-in went overdue, we initiated a trace. Your incident report came up. Fast response. We take care of our people. Garza's voice was neutral, but not cold. The practiced tone of someone who understood that what he said next mattered. What did you see inside the vehicle before you made entry? Daniel told him. All of it. The climate panel, the temperature reading, the positioning of the dog near Ava, never away from her. The tattoo he'd noticed but couldn't immediately place. Garza listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, the lieutenant said quietly, You noticed the panel was active. I did. And you photographed it. Before anyone could tell me not to. Garza looked at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of recognition. Soldier to soldier, even if the uniforms were different. That was good thinking, Garza said. It was basic thinking, Daniel said. Something failed. I wanted a record of what it looked like before the record disappeared. Dr. Huang came out at the 47-minute mark, and when she said the word stable, Daniel felt something in his chest unknot that he hadn't realized had been clenched since the moment he smashed that window. Core temperature on admission was 106.8, Huang said. We've brought it down to 102.4. She's unconscious, but responsive to stimuli. The cooling measures performed in the field bought her meaningful time. I won't minimize that. Long-term damage? Garza asked. Huang was honest. We don't know yet. Kidney function is our primary concern. Neurological assessment will follow once she's stabilized further. Her physical conditioning is a significant factor in her favor. Her body has reserves that a less trained individual simply wouldn't have. And the canine? Daniel asked. Critical, but stable. Same trajectory. Garza nodded once, tight and controlled. Then he stepped away to make a phone call, and Daniel was alone with the information for a moment. 106.8 degrees. He'd taken a first aid course 4 years ago that covered heat emergencies. The instructor, a grizzled paramedic named Kowalski, who had the bedside manner of a drill sergeant, had drawn a line on the whiteboard at 104 degrees and said, "Above this line, you are in damage territory. Above 106, you are in catastrophic territory. Above 108, you are writing a eulogy." Ava Collins had come in at 106.8. She had been 11 minutes, maybe less, from the line Kowalski hadn't even put on the whiteboard. The veterinary technician found Daniel at the 49th minute and told him Atlas was awake. That was the moment something in Daniel's composure genuinely threatened to come apart, and he didn't fully understand why. He'd saved dogs before. It was part of the job. But something about this particular dog, about the image burned into his memory of that German shepherd lying with his body pressed against Ava's unconscious form throughout every one of those 38 minutes, had gotten under his skin in a way he wasn't prepared for. He followed the technician, Brianna, 22 years old, wearing scrubs with small paw prints on them, into the recovery room, and sat on the floor next to Atlas without thinking about it. Atlas lifted his head. His eyes were glassy, but present, aware. "Hey," Daniel said softly. "She's okay. You hear me? She's okay." Atlas held his gaze for a long moment. Then he laid his head down on Daniel's knee. Daniel sat there with his hand on the dog's side and didn't say anything else for a while. Behind the partition in the cruiser outside, Rex was being looked after by the night officer. Daniel had checked on him twice already. Rex was fine. Rex was always fine. But Daniel sat with Atlas anyway, because Atlas had done something that went beyond training, beyond command, beyond the mechanics of what a working dog was supposed to do. In 42 minutes of lethal heat, Atlas had not moved away from Ava's body. Not once. He had pressed his failing body against hers and stayed there, as if proximity could protect her when nothing else could. "The good ones do that," Brianna said softly from across the room. Daniel didn't answer. He just kept his hand on Atlas's side and felt the slow, steady rise and fall. Lieutenant Commander Shaw found him in the hallway at 11:03 p.m. Shaw was older than Garza, mid-40s, gray at the temples, eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. He stopped in front of Daniel and looked at him with an evaluating directness that reminded Daniel of every senior officer he'd ever met, and either respected or feared, depending on the day. "I've watched your body cam footage twice," Shaw said. No preamble. Beginning to end. "And?" "You cleared the dog first." "The dog was closest to the door." "That's not why you did it first, and we both know that." Shaw's voice was even, not accusing, just precise. "You did it because you looked at that car and you made a calculation. The woman was unconscious. The dog might fight you. You removed the potential variable first." Daniel said nothing. That's tactical thinking, Shaw said, from a patrol officer in a parking lot at 2 in the afternoon. He paused. She wants to see you. She's awake? She came around about 20 minutes ago. She's asking questions. A flicker of something crossed Shaw's face. Not quite amusement, not quite grief. She asked about Atlas before she asked about herself. Before she asked about the doctors, the hospital, any of it. First word out of her mouth was his name. Daniel felt that land somewhere deep. Is that? He stopped, started again. Is that surprising? For her? Shaw considered the question seriously, which Daniel appreciated. No, Shaw said finally. That's exactly who she is. She was propped against the elevated hospital bed when Daniel stepped into the room. One V-line in her left arm, a residual flush across her cheekbones that was the last echo of what her body had been through. She looked tired in a way that went all the way down, the specific exhaustion of someone who'd been brought back from somewhere far and hadn't fully processed the distance yet. But her eyes were sharp, completely, unnervingly sharp. "You broke my window," she said. Her voice was dry and scraped rough, but the delivery was deliberate. "Yes, ma'am." "That's a $2,000 window." "I'll put it on my tab." Something moved at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile. Daniel Reyes. She'd already gotten his name somehow, which didn't surprise him. Patrol officer, Phoenix PD, 3 years on the force, canine handler. "You did your homework fast for someone who was unconscious an hour ago." "I had help." She nodded slightly toward the doorway where Shaw had been standing. "Tell me about Atlas." So he told her, all of it, the same way he'd told Garza, except this time he didn't lead with the clinical detail. He told her about the way Atlas had been positioned when he found him, body pressed to hers even in the back seat. He told her about the way Atlas had looked at him when he carried him out of the car. Not with fear, not with aggression, but with something that Daniel didn't have a word for except awareness. He told her about sitting on the floor of the recovery room with Atlas's head on his knee. He watched her face while he talked. She held it together through most of it, jaw tight, eyes clear. But when he got to the part about Atlas laying his head down, that was when her eyes closed, briefly, and her throat moved. "He never left you," Daniel said. "Not for a single minute." The silence that followed was long and real. Then Ava opened her eyes, and the sharpness that had been there when he walked in had shifted into something else. Not softer exactly, but deeper, more honest. "The cooling system," she said. Her voice had changed register, quieter and harder underneath. "It was active when you found me." "Yes." "And the car was still 110. "Yes." She didn't ask him to connect the dots. She was already there. "This isn't the first time that system has failed," she said. Daniel went very still. "What do you know about that?" "I know that 3 weeks ago, a senior chief in my unit had the same vehicle, same model. His dog got sick on a training day, and he thought it was the heat. He thought the dog just needed more water." She paused. "He didn't connect it to the car because the car was a new issue, and nobody had told him yet." Daniel stared at her. "Was there a report filed?" "Internally, yes." Her eyes locked onto his. Whether that report went anywhere, that's a different question. The implications of that settled over Daniel like cold water. Sudden, shocking, inescapable. Someone had known. Someone had known the system failed, and Ava Collins had still been driving that vehicle. She watched his face process it. "Now you understand," she said quietly, "why the person I need to call doesn't sleep." The phone call Ava made lasted 4 minutes and 31 seconds. Daniel knew because he was standing in the hallway outside her room, close enough to hear her voice through the partially open door. Not the words, just the tone. And something about that tone made him stop walking and stand very still. She wasn't asking for help. She was reporting. Calm, clipped, precise. The voice of someone delivering a situation briefing, not a woman who'd been pulled unconscious from a boiling car 3 hours ago. Whatever she'd been through physically, her mind had already shifted back into operational mode, and the person on the other end of that call was receiving information, not offering comfort. When she hung up, the silence that followed was different from the one before the call. Heavier. Daniel pushed the door open and looked at her. "Who did you call?" he asked. Ava set the phone face down on the blanket beside her. "Someone who needed to know." "That's not an answer." She looked at him steadily. "No, it's not." She paused. "Sit down, Officer Reyes." He sat. 3 weeks ago, she said, her voice low and measured, a formal complaint was filed through Naval Logistics about the cooling system failure on my unit's vehicle fleet. 2 vehicles, same model, same defect. The complaint cited a potential safety risk to personnel and canine assets during high-temperature training operations. She stopped. That complaint was reviewed, logged, and classified as non-critical. Daniel felt the back of his neck go cold. Non-critical. The determination was that the defect was intermittent and low probability. The vehicles were flagged for a software patch at the next scheduled maintenance cycle. She held his gaze. My next scheduled maintenance was in 11 days. The number sat between them like something with weight. 11 days, Daniel repeated. I was driving a vehicle with a documented failure mode, Ava said, in 110-degree heat, with my canine, in a city that averages 17 heat-related deaths every summer. Something moved behind her eyes. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder than anger. And the person who signed off on non-critical is currently a senior logistics officer at Naval Station San Diego. Does Shaw know? Shaw made the call with me. Daniel stood up before he'd consciously decided to. He walked to the small window at the far end of the room and stood there with his back to her for a moment, processing. Someone had looked at a documented safety failure and called it acceptable. And because of that decision, Ava Collins had nearly died on a Tuesday afternoon in a parking lot, while her dog lay next to her and pressed his failing body against hers, because it was the only thing he could do. What happens to the officer who signed off? Daniel asked. That, Ava said quietly, depends on what the next 72 hours look like. Lieutenant Commander Shaw was waiting in the hallway when Daniel came out, not pacing, not on the phone, just standing there with his arms at his sides and an expression that told Daniel the man already knew everything that had just been said in that room and had been thinking about it for longer than the past 4 minutes. You heard, Daniel said. I was part of the call. Then you know what I'm about to ask. Shaw looked at him. Ask it anyway. Is she safe? Daniel said. Not medically. I mean, is she safe? If someone signed off on a non-critical flag to keep those vehicles operational, and now one of them almost killed her, is there any version of this where that same someone has an interest in this story not getting out? Shaw was quiet for exactly the kind of moment that confirmed Daniel's instincts. We're taking precautions, Shaw said. That's a yes. That's a we're taking precautions. Daniel looked at him hard. I want a uniform outside her door tonight. Shaw studied him. You're a patrol officer. I'm the patrol officer who pulled her out of that car and who has photographs of that climate panel on his personal phone, And I will make all of that extremely inconvenient for everyone involved if I don't have a uniform outside her door by midnight." The silence stretched. Then Shaw said, "I'll make a call." Officer Tina Morales was 28 years old and had the kind of quiet competence that Daniel had learned to recognize and trust immediately. She arrived at Maricopa Medical at 11:45 and took up her position outside Ava's room without needing to be told anything twice. "Nobody in or out without her explicit consent," Daniel told her. "Hospital staff is fine. Anyone in a suit, anyone who identifies as federal, you call me first. Anyone who can't explain exactly who they are in one sentence, you call me first." Morales nodded once. "Copy that." Daniel went back to the waiting room and called Webb. Webb picked up on the second ring, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either. "Talk," Webb said. Daniel talked. He told him everything. The logistics complaint, the non-critical classification, the 11 days to maintenance, Shaw's careful non-answer about whether Ava was safe. He told it fast and without editorializing, because Webb didn't need color commentary. He needed facts. When Daniel finished, Webb was quiet for a long time. "Reyes," he finally said, "do you understand what you're standing in the middle of right now?" "I'm beginning to." A Navy SEAL, a documented equipment failure, a cover-up at the logistics level, and a patrol officer with photographs that nobody authorized him to take. Webb's voice was flat. "This is not a hot car call anymore." "No," Daniel said. "It's not. I'm calling the department legal advisor tonight. Don't send those photographs to anyone. Don't post anything. Don't talk to anyone with a press badge." A pause. "And Reyes? Good instinct on the uniform at the door." "She saved herself," Daniel said. "I just broke a window. The least I can do is make sure nobody finishes what the heat started." Webb hung up. Daniel was still in the waiting room at 2:17 in the morning when Atlas was moved. Brianna came and found him. Somehow she'd figured out that he was the right person to tell, and said that the veterinary team had upgraded Atlas from critical to serious stable and was relocating him to a better-equipped recovery space. "Can he be moved to a room near her?" Daniel asked. Brianna blinked. "He's a dog." "He's a naval working dog, and she's been asking about him every 40 minutes. Daniel looked at her. "Is it physically possible?" Brianna thought about it. Then she said, "I'll see what I can do." She did it. Daniel didn't know what favor she called in, or what argument she made to hospital administration, but by 3 a.m., Atlas was in a padded kennel in a small anteroom adjacent to Ava's ICU bay, separated from her only by a glass partition. When Brianna told Ava, something happened to Ava's face that Daniel hadn't seen yet. Not the controlled calm, not the sharp operational focus, not the cold precision she'd used on the phone. Something that was just human and honest and completely unguarded. "Thank you," Ava said, and the way she said it carried about 10 times the weight of the words themselves. Brianna looked like she might cry. "Of course." The twist arrived at 6:43 in the morning. Daniel had fallen asleep in the waiting room chair and woke up to Shaw standing over him, holding 2 cups of coffee, with the expression of a man who had been awake all night and had received news that he was still deciding how to categorize. "Drink this," Shaw said, handing him one of the cups. Daniel drank it. "The vehicle's onboard diagnostic system," Shaw said, sitting down across from him. "Our people pulled the data overnight." "And?" "The cooling system didn't fail because of the software defect." Daniel set the coffee cup down very slowly. "What?" "The software defect is real. It exists. It's documented. It's been causing intermittent failures across the fleet. But in Ava's vehicle specifically..." Shaw stopped, looked at his own hands, then back at Daniel. In her vehicle, the cooling system was manually disabled. Not through the defect, not through a malfunction. His voice dropped. Someone accessed the system remotely and shut it down. The waiting room felt like it had gotten smaller. When? Daniel asked. Approximately 30 minutes before she returned to the vehicle from her training drill. Daniel's brain ran the math and didn't like the answer it got. That means someone knew her schedule. Yes. Someone knew where she was, when she'd be back at the vehicle, and had remote access to the vehicle's systems. Yes. Shaw. Daniel leaned forward. Who has that kind of access? Shaw looked at him for a long time. That's what we're trying to determine, he said carefully. And that's why the next conversation needs to happen somewhere that isn't this waiting room. They moved to a small family consultation room down the hall. The kind of room hospitals keep for the conversations that shouldn't happen in public spaces. Shaw closed the door, and for the first time since Daniel had met him, the lieutenant commander's composure showed its edges. The logistics officer who signed off on the non-critical flag, Shaw said. His name is Commander Gerald Harmon. He has been with Naval Station San Diego for 6 years. He has full access to fleet vehicle management systems, including remote diagnostics and remote systems override. Daniel waited. Harmon and Collins have a history, Shaw continued. 14 months ago, Ava filed a formal complaint against him. Conduct unbecoming, abuse of authority. The complaint was investigated, and Harmon was given a letter of reprimand, the minimum possible consequence. Everything clicked into place at once, loud, clean, unavoidable. Ava hadn't almost died because of a software glitch. Ava had almost died because she'd made an enemy in uniform. And that enemy had waited 14 months, stayed close to the infrastructure, and then used a documented equipment defect as cover. She knew, Daniel said. Last night, when she said the person she needed to call doesn't sleep, she already suspected it wasn't an accident. She suspected, Shaw said. Now we have data. Daniel stood up. You need to arrest him. It's not that simple. It is that simple. A man used a remote access system to disable a cooling unit in a vehicle containing a human being and a service animal in 110-degree heat. That is attempted murder. That is not a JAG matter. That is not an internal review. That is a criminal charge. Shaw looked at him with an expression that was exhausted and resolute in equal measure. I know what it is, Officer Reyes. Which is why I spent the last 4 hours on the phone with NCIS and the FBI. He paused. Harmon's access logs are being pulled this morning. His travel and communication records are being subpoenaed. This is moving. How fast? As fast as it can move through the systems that govern it. Daniel turned toward the door. Where are you going? Shaw asked. To tell her, Daniel said. Because if someone tried to kill her once, and they're still out there, she deserves to know it before anyone else decides what she should or shouldn't be told. Shaw didn't stop him, which told Daniel everything he needed to know about whether it was the right call. Ava was awake when Daniel pushed open the door. Not just awake, sitting up, phone in hand, IV line pulled taut across her forearm, where she'd shifted position without thinking about it. She looked at Daniel's face when he walked in, and read it the way someone reads a weather system. Fast, accurate, and without needing the full explanation. Tell me, she said. Daniel closed the door behind him. He pulled the chair close to the bed, sat down, and leaned forward with his forearms on his knees, the posture of someone who wasn't going to soften what he was about to say. The diagnostic data came back, he said. The cooling system in your vehicle didn't fail because of the software defect. Ava's jaw tightened slightly. She didn't speak. It was remotely disabled, Daniel said. Someone accessed your vehicle system and manually shut down the cooling unit approximately 30 minutes before you returned from your drill. The room was very quiet. Ava set her phone down on the blanket. She placed both hands flat on her legs and looked at a fixed point somewhere past Daniel's left shoulder. Not unfocused, but the opposite. Hyper-focused. The way people looked when they were running every implication of a piece of information simultaneously and needed their eyes somewhere neutral so the rest of their brain could work. "Harmon," she said. It wasn't a question. "Shaw believes so. NCIS and the FBI are pulling his access logs and communications this morning." She nodded once, slow and precise, like a period at the end of a sentence. "He waited 14 months, she said quietly. "Yes. He waited 14 months, and then he used the defect as cover. He knew the fleet had the software issue. He knew an investigation would start with the defect and stay there." Her voice was level, but Daniel could hear what lived underneath it. Not fear. Something far more controlled than fear. "He almost got away with it." "Almost," Daniel said. She looked at him then, direct. "Because you photographed the panel. Because you didn't die." Something moved across her face, fast and then gone. "Same thing," she said. Shaw came in 20 minutes later with Lieutenant Garza and a woman Daniel hadn't seen before. Civilian clothes, federal ID clipped to her jacket. The kind of bearing that said investigator before she'd opened her mouth to speak. "Special Agent Diana Reeves, FDI," she said, looking at Daniel briefly before turning her full attention to Ava. "Petty Officer Collins, I need to ask you some questions about your history with Commander Gerald Harmon." "I know what you need," Ava said. "Sit down." Reeves sat. What followed was 40 minutes of the most controlled, precise account Daniel had ever heard a person give about something that had nearly killed them. Ava didn't editorialize. She didn't perform. She laid out the timeline. The complaint she'd filed against Harmon 14 months ago. The conduct she'd witnessed. The investigation that had produced a letter of reprimand and nothing else. And the specific ways in which Harmon's continued presence in the fleet management system had intersected with her unit's operational infrastructure. Daniel sat in the corner and said nothing. He was still officially present as a witness to the vehicle discovery, which gave him a reason to be in the room that nobody had challenged yet, and he wasn't going to give anyone a reason to reconsider that. "After the reprimand," Reeves said, "did Harmon make contact with you?" "Once, 6 months ago. He came to a unit function. Technically, he had every right to be there. He didn't say anything directly. He just..." Ava paused. "He made sure I saw him. He held eye contact for about 4 seconds and then walked away." "You interpreted that as a threat." "I interpreted that as a message." Ava's voice was precise. "There's a difference. A threat is something you can report. A message is something you understand and carry alone." Reeves looked up from her notes. "Did you report it?" "No." A beat. "I didn't think I had grounds. I had an eye contact and a feeling. You can't file a complaint on a feeling." "And now?" Reeves said. "Now I have a diagnostic log and an FBI agent in my hospital room," Ava said. "Now I have grounds." Reeves stepped out to make calls at the 90-minute mark, and for a few minutes it was just Daniel, Ava, Shaw, and Garza in the room. A patrol officer, a Navy SEAL, and 2 naval officers, all sitting with the weight of what they now knew. It was Garza who broke the silence. "He's still at San Diego," Garza said. "As of 2 hours ago, he was on base, business as usual. He doesn't know we have the diagnostic data yet." "He will soon," Shaw said. "These things don't stay quiet." "How long until NCIS moves?" Daniel asked. "Could be today. Could be 48 hours. Depends on what the access logs show, and how clean the chain of evidence needs to be before they're ready to make an arrest that sticks. Shaw looked at Ava. The FBI involvement accelerates it. Reeves has resources NCIS doesn't. Ava hadn't said anything for several minutes. She was looking toward the glass partition that separated her room from the anteroom where Atlas was recovering. She could see him from where she sat, the slow movement of his breathing, the way he lifted his head every so often, as if checking whether she was still there. "He could have killed Atlas," she said. Not loudly, just clearly. Nobody responded immediately, because there wasn't a response that was adequate. "He knew Atlas was in the vehicle," she continued. "He had access to my training schedule. He knew I'd run the drill, return to the car, run the remote cooling, and wait inside while the temperature dropped." She turned her gaze from the partition back to the room. "He knew everything, and he made the calculation that both of us were acceptable losses." The word, losses, hit the room like something physical. Daniel looked at her hands. They were flat and still on her legs, exactly as they'd been when he'd first told her. Not clenched, not shaking, just still. He understood then, completely and fully, what it cost her to sit in that stillness. And he understood why she was choosing it. "He underestimated one thing," Daniel said. Ava looked at him. "He built the whole plan around the assumption that you'd be alone in that parking lot," Daniel said. "That nobody would stop in time. That it would look like a tragic accident involving a known equipment defect. And by the time anyone looked deeper, the story would already be written." He paused. He didn't account for a 911 call about a dog. The arrest happened at 4:17 p.m. the following day. Daniel wasn't there for it. He was back on patrol, back in his cruiser, back on the routes he drove every day. But he knew the moment it happened, because Shaw called him directly. "NCIS took Harmon into custody at Naval Station San Diego at 16:17, Shaw said. Access logs confirmed a remote login to the Fleet Vehicle Management System at 14:22, the day of the incident. His credentials, his device, a server trace that puts the access point within the base perimeter." A pause. "He's being charged with attempted murder of a federal officer, tampering with government property, and conduct unbecoming. There may be additional charges as the investigation develops." Daniel was stopped at a red light on Camelback Road, the same road he'd turned onto 2 days ago when the call came in about a dog in a hot car. "How is she taking it?" he asked. She said, and I'm quoting directly, "It's a start." Daniel exhaled. "Yeah, that sounds right." "Reyes," Shaw's voice shifted slightly. "What you did. Not just the window, all of it. The photographs, the impound hold, the uniform at the door, the diagnostic data chain. You kept this clean when it could have gotten very messy, very fast." "I just didn't walk away," Daniel said. "That's more than most people do." He went to the hospital that evening. Not because Shaw asked him to. Not because there was anything official left to do. He went because he'd spent 2 days in a waiting room that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, and he wanted to see with his own eyes that the thing he'd been fighting for was still standing. Ava was sitting up in bed, with a tablet propped against her knees and a half-eaten cup of hospital jello on the tray beside her when he knocked on the open door. She looked up. "You heard," she said. "Shaw called me." 4:17 p.m. She set the tablet down. "I've been in worse firefights with a faster resolution." Daniel sat in the chair that had basically become his chair at this point. "How are you actually doing?" She considered the question, not performing consideration, actually doing it. "Kidney function is back to normal range as of this morning. Neurological assessment was clean. I'll have fatigue for another week or two, and I'm not cleared for physical training yet, which is a brief, controlled exhale. Difficult. And the rest of it? She was quiet for a moment. The rest of it, she said. I'll work through the way I work through everything. She looked at him. One thing at a time. Forward. Through the glass partition, Atlas was sitting up in his kennel, alert, ears forward, watching Ava with the concentrated patience of an animal that had decided it was willing to wait as long as necessary for something to happen. She noticed Daniel watching Atlas and said, Brianna told me he's been sitting like that every time he can see me. Just watching. He stayed with you the whole time in the car, Daniel said. I think he's just making sure you're not going anywhere again without him. Ava looked at Atlas through the glass for a long moment. Smart dog, she said softly. The best kind, Daniel said. The silence that followed was the comfortable kind. The kind between people who have been through something together and don't need to fill the space with words to prove it meant something. Then Ava said, I want to ask you something. Ask. When you pulled up to that car, before you saw me, before you knew what was in there, if it had just been a dog, just Atlas and nobody else. She looked at him steadily. Would you have broken the window? Daniel didn't hesitate. Yes, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, slow, once, the way she nodded when something confirmed something she'd already decided. Good, she said. That's the right answer. Outside, Phoenix was cooling into evening for the first time in what felt like weeks. The heat retreating the way it always eventually did, slowly and without apology, as if it had somewhere else to be. Inside the room, the IV monitor beeped its quiet rhythm. Atlas shifted position in his kennel and lay his chin on his paws. Ava picked up her tablet again, and Daniel sat in his chair and understood, with the clarity that only comes after something has been survived, that some calls change you before you realize they're changing you. Quietly, in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, in a parking lot where nobody else stopped. Ava was discharged on the 5th day, not because the doctors were fully satisfied. Dr. Huang had made it clear she would have preferred another 48 hours of observation, but because Ava had looked at her on the morning of day 5 and said, with the particular calm of someone who had already made a decision and was simply informing the room of it, I'm leaving today. Tell me what I need to monitor, and I'll monitor it. Huang had looked at her for a long moment, then looked at the chart, then looked back at Ava. Hydration. Minimum 3 liters daily. No physical exertion beyond walking for 2 weeks. Any headache, confusion, or elevated heart rate, and you go immediately to the nearest ER. She paused. And I mean immediately, Petty Officer Collins. Not after you finish whatever you're doing. Understood, Ava said. I need you to actually mean that. I actually mean it. Huang signed the discharge papers with the expression of someone who wasn't entirely convinced, but recognized an immovable force when she was standing in front of one. The second condition of Ava's discharge was non-negotiable, and came not from Huang, but from Ava herself. Atlas left with her, or she didn't leave at all. Brianna had spent the previous evening navigating 3 separate hospital administrators and 1 very confused facilities coordinator to make the arrangement official. When Ava walked out of the ICU bay that morning, Atlas walked beside her on a temporary lead. IV removed, gait slightly careful but steady, tail moving in the low, controlled way that working dogs carried themselves when they were still recalibrating, but not willing to show weakness. He stayed exactly 1 step behind her left heel the entire way to the exit, like he'd never stopped working. Daniel was waiting outside with his cruiser. He hadn't been asked. He'd just shown up at 7:40 a.m. with 2 cups of coffee and the quiet certainty that someone should be there when she walked out. not in an official capacity, not as a witness or a reporting officer, but simply as the person who'd been present at the beginning and felt, in some way he couldn't fully articulate, that he ought to be present at this moment too. Ava stopped when she saw him. She looked at the coffee. She looked at him. She looked at Rex, who had his nose pressed against the cruiser window with the focused interest of a dog who had decided Atlas was worth monitoring. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know." She took the coffee. She looked down at Atlas, who had turned his attention to Rex with the measured assessment of a professional meeting a colleague for the first time under unusual circumstances. "They're going to be fine," Daniel said. "I know," Ava said. "Rex has good instincts." "He does." She looked at Daniel. "You have good instincts too." It was, coming from her, about the highest compliment available. He understood that, and he accepted it without deflecting. "How are you doing?" he asked. Honestly. She took a slow breath, looked at the sky, the morning sky over Phoenix, which was doing what it always did in the early hours before the heat reasserted itself, offering about 90 minutes of something almost gentle before the sun remembered what it was capable of. "I'm angry," she said. "I was going to say I'm fine, but you asked honestly, so I'm angry. And I'm grateful. And I'm tired." A pause. All three at the same time. "That sounds about right for what you've been through." "It doesn't feel like enough," she said. "The anger, I mean. It feels like it should be bigger, louder." She looked at her coffee cup. "But I've learned, loud anger burns out. Cold anger lasts. And I need this one to last." The case against Commander Gerald Harmon moved faster than Daniel had expected, and slower than Ava had hoped. The access logs were clean. His credentials, his device, his location, his timestamp. 30 minutes before Ava returned to that vehicle, Harmon had logged into the fleet management system from a terminal inside Naval Station San Diego and executed a remote override that disabled the cooling unit in vehicle number 7, Ava's vehicle, while leaving the user interface display intact and active so it would appear to be functioning normally. It was meticulous. It was calculated. And it left absolutely nowhere to go except straight toward him. NCIS and the FBI worked the case jointly, and Reeves called Daniel twice in the following week to clarify points from his body cam footage and his on-scene photographs. Each time she was precise and brief, and each time she ended the call with, "You kept the chain clean. That matters." Daniel didn't tell her that he'd photographed the panel on pure instinct, without any conscious legal strategy behind it. He figured that was beside the point now. Harmon's attorney entered a not guilty plea at the arraignment, which surprised no one. What surprised the prosecution team, and what Reeves conveyed to Shaw with the careful neutrality of someone delivering significant information, was that during Harmon's initial interview, before his attorney had arrived, and before he'd fully understood the extent of what the diagnostic data had captured, he'd said something that the investigators had recorded and would eventually present to a jury. He'd said, "She brought it on herself." 6 words. 5 witnesses in the room when he said them. When Ava heard this from Shaw, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Make sure that gets read in open court." Shaw promised her it would. 3 weeks after the parking lot, Daniel got a call from Webb telling him the department's review board had completed its assessment of the window-breaking incident. He'd been waiting for it without pretending he wasn't. "The determination," Webb said, in the measured voice of a man reading from an official document, "is that Officer Reyes exercised necessary force in an emergency situation, consistent with the doctrine of exigent circumstances, and that his actions were not only legally defensible, but represented exceptional judgment under extreme conditions. A pause. They're recommending a commendation. Daniel sat with that for a moment. How do you feel about it? Webb asked. I feel like it shouldn't have required a review, Daniel said. No, Webb agreed. But the fact that it went this way matters. It sets a precedent. Next time a patrol officer in this department faces a split-second call about a living thing in a locked vehicle in this heat, they'll have this on record. He paused. You didn't just save 2 people, Reyes. You built a document. Daniel hadn't thought about it that way. He thought about it that way now. The press conference was Ava's idea, not the Navy's idea, not the department's idea, not Reeves' idea. Ava's. She'd called Daniel directly, which was how things worked between them now, and she'd said, I want to speak publicly. I want to say what actually happened. I want people to understand what the heat does and what one person choosing to stop can do. A beat. Will you stand with me? He hadn't needed to think about it. It was held outside Phoenix City Hall on a Saturday morning, early enough to beat the worst of the heat, which struck Daniel as the right call on every level. A small podium, a cluster of microphones, a crowd that had grown larger than anyone anticipated because the story had spread in the way that true things sometimes spread. Quietly at first, and then everywhere at once. Daniel stood to Ava's left in his dress uniform. Shaw and Garza stood to her right. Brianna was in the crowd somewhere. Daniel had spotted her earlier, and she had been crying already, which he respected completely. Webb was standing near the back, with the expression of a man who was proud without wanting to make it about himself. Rex was in the cruiser. Atlas stood beside Ava at the podium, in his working harness, which Brianna had cleaned and pressed with a care that went significantly beyond professional obligation. Ava stood at the microphone and looked at the crowd for a moment without speaking. Not for dramatic effect, but because she was choosing her words the way she chose everything. Deliberately, and with full commitment to what she was about to say. I want to start with something people don't usually say at these things, she began. I was not supposed to survive what happened to me 3 weeks ago. I want to be clear about that. Not as a dramatic statement, as a medical fact. I was 8 minutes from a point that doctors call non-recoverable. 8 minutes. The crowd was completely still. I survived because of 2 things, she continued. A dog who refused to leave my side, and a police officer who refused to keep driving. She glanced to Daniel briefly, just a glance, but it carried everything. Officer Reyes didn't know who I was when he broke that window. He didn't know my rank or my service record or my name. He knew a living thing was dying inside a locked car, and he decided that was enough. She paused. I have been in combat situations where the decision to act was complicated, where the variables were unclear and the cost of being wrong was permanent. I respect that weight. But this was not complicated. This was a parking lot at 2 in the afternoon, and the variable was simple: stop or don't stop. Break the window or keep walking. Her voice didn't waver. He stopped. He broke the window. And everything that followed is what happens when one person decides that a living thing's life is worth more than the inconvenience of stopping. A murmur ran through the crowd. Not approval exactly, but something deeper. Recognition. Heat doesn't care about your rank, Ava said. It doesn't care about your training or your service record or how many deployments you've survived. It kills quietly, and it kills fast. And it kills people who believe they are too strong to be in danger. She looked out at the crowd. I believed that. I want you to hear me say it clearly. I believed I would know when I was in danger. And I was wrong. The heat was faster than my belief. She stopped. Then, check the cars. Check the vehicles in parking lots when it's hot. Look in the windows. If something looks wrong, make the call. Be the person who stops. She paused one final time. You might not know who you're saving. You might never know. But they will. And Atlas will. And I do. Afterward, when the crowd had thinned and the cameras had moved on, Ava found Daniel standing near his cruiser, with Rex sitting at his feet, and Atlas standing beside her. The two dogs regarding each other with the relaxed comfort of animals who had, over the past 3 weeks, quietly decided they were on the same side. That was good, Daniel said. It was honest, she said. That's all I had. Sometimes, that's everything. She looked at him with the directness that he'd come to understand was simply how she existed in the world. Not performing confidence, just living inside it. I'm going back to San Diego next week, she said. When Harmon's trial date is set, I'll be back. But for now, I need to go back to my unit. Do the work. Get cleared for duty. She glanced down at Atlas. We both do. You'll be ready, Daniel said. We'll be ready, she corrected. He accepted the correction. Reyes, she said, what you did, starting from the moment you pulled into that parking lot and ending with everything that came after, that wasn't just a good call. That was character. She held his gaze. Don't let anyone reduce it to procedure. Don't let them give you a medal and a handshake and file it away. What you did was human. Keep being that. Daniel looked at her for a moment. Then he extended his hand. She shook it, firm, direct. The handshake of someone who meant it in the way that actions mean things, not words. Then she turned and walked away across the plaza with Atlas matching her stride, step for step, exactly 1 pace behind her left heel. Daniel drove his patrol route that afternoon the same way he drove it every day. Same streets, same turns, same rhythm of a city that was always moving, always heating up, always asking more of the people responsible for it than most people ever saw. But he drove it differently than he had 3 weeks ago. He couldn't have explained exactly what was different. Nothing procedural had changed. Nothing structural. He still responded to the same calls, still wore the same uniform, still checked in with dispatch every hour, and monitored the radio with one part of his mind, while the other part stayed present on the road. What was different was smaller than procedure and larger than habit. It was the way he looked at cars in parking lots now. Not with suspicion, not with dread, just with attention. The kind of attention that costs nothing except a moment and a willingness to see what's actually there instead of what's easiest to assume. Rex sat behind the partition, ears forward, watching the road the way he always did. Patient, present, completely certain that whatever came next, they would handle it together. On the radio, the afternoon dispatcher ran through the call log in her calm, steady voice. A fender bender on 7th Avenue. A welfare check on Dunlap. A suspicious vehicle near the school on 43rd. Daniel responded to each one. The sun climbed higher over Phoenix, doing what Phoenix suns always did. Relentless, indifferent, testing everything and everyone beneath it. And Officer Daniel Reyes drove his route and checked every parking lot he passed, and understood in the clearest and most permanent way that courage was not a grand event you prepared for. It was a Tuesday afternoon choice in a grocery store parking lot, made in 40 seconds, with a baton, and without hesitation. And that choice had been enough. That choice would always be enough.